I'll press the record. Hi, everyone. We welcome you to this new interview on doing sociology. And today we have with us Dr. Anurekha Chari Wagh, who teaches at the Department of Sociology, University of Hyderabad. She has previously taught at the University of Pune. She works in the field of gender and development, labor, poverty alleviation, women's movement, and she's published in the fields of poverty alleviation programs, gender, and empowerment of women. We're very glad to have you today, Anurekha, with us, and really looking forward to this interview.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. It's really a pleasure and a privilege to be part of this platform. Thank you. Thank you.
To begin with, one of the first questions that we'd like to begin this interview with is, you've written about mentoring in academics and how it is different from guiding. And in that context, you write that mentoring has a major contribution in the process of knowledge production. And yet sociologists have not engaged much with the concept in the country. So why do you think this is the case?
You see, while guiding and mentoring kind of overlap with each other, guiding is, I believe, a much more professional relationship that occurs within a particular institution. Either it could be for a master's dissertation, MPhil, which is now not used by UGC, but of course PhD. But mentoring thou could start within a professional, institutional, relationship kind, like through supervision, through guiding. But it is more organic by nature. It evolves over a period of time, and it also includes, as far as guiding is concerned, similarity that it helps in terms of career advancement, more positive visibility, networking. It kinds of helps, but because it is organic, after a certain time, the binaries between the professional and the personal kind of, break down within a mentoring relationship. So, of course, depending upon in terms of the compatibility, depending in terms of gender, caste, class, there is a possibility of it evolving into a much more fruitful friendship and last a longer time. It has a context in terms of time and space. So in that context, guiding is, I believe, extremely limited and more contextual in terms of the specific project that we are doing, either a PhD or MA or whatever. So that is where I'm making this distinction. Of course, we also have to understand that the way as feminist we are trying to understand, or as I understand mentoring, is also a little different from what in many higher education institutions now they have institutionalized the mentoring process, saying that okay, teachers have to mentor 10 students, things like that. So we are also discussing in our university, but that again is very, very limited, and it is not the same nuances which is there in this long-term relationship. It doesn't have that, but now the whole process is trying to get institutionalized within the structure. So I think over a period of time, one also would have to engage with that process. But now, as I believe, mentoring in terms of more organic evolves, and it also has I believe that it also has choice, like where you consciously choose someone, there is a reciprocity which is there, which is not there so much in guiding. Like even though as students are allowed to have a choice, but it is again very limited. So it need not necessarily be from the institution. It can be from outside. It can be, more of the group that you are part of. So it could be, it is much more organic, I feel. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, going back to the question in terms of why do I think that mentoring, even though it plays a very important, contribution in the knowledge production process, but I feel that Sociologists have really not, invested a lot of time on that. And I especially came across this when I was trying to write on mentoring. And I tried a lot to find out a lot of references that would talk about their own mentoring process or even guiding process within the Indian academia. But I found it, it was very rare, very few articles that were really talking about. They were talking about teaching, but not in terms of the mentoring process. And I think what is there is because the whole analysis of mentoring process somewhere involves a very critical evaluation of one's own self. And the whole process of mentoring, especially now with, the whole issue in terms of recognition of differences in terms of gender, differences in terms of caste, class, sexuality, religion, region, the whole process of mentoring involves a recognition that there is inequality, recognition that there is an acceptance of authority. So there is a recognition that there is a dominant partner in that relationship. So and therefore, because it is imbued with the notion of power, and the power more often than not rests on the mentor, because whoever they are in a much better position in order to provide that kind of guidance to the mentees. And so therefore, if we are to write about our own mentoring process, that means it also involves a very critical self-reflection or our own ways in which that we ourselves use power. And to do that, I think would make us very vulnerable. Like if I start, talking to my own students in terms of the power that I have, it would make me vulnerable and somewhat having a chance that it could reduce my authority. It could kind of put a question mark on my authority. So somewhere this self-criticality which is required to develop a critical analysis of the mentoring process is what I think is one of the reasons why many of us have not really looked at the mentoring process. Like I'll give you another example. In recent time, like for example, sociology discipline in India has worked a lot on caste. So caste, later on gender, has been something that we have been working on. But if you look at how many of us have really looked at our own privilege, which we haven't done. So we talk about decasting, we talk about, oh, the caste doesn't matter, but it just comes with us, and we do not engage enough with the power privilege that we hold, coming from a particular caste. So I think somewhere looking at one's own self in terms of a critical autoethnographic kind of a research work is still missing. Maybe it is there when you're talking about, after many established sociologists write their memoirs, write their journey, it is one thing. But as each one of us in the way that we are doing sociology, writing about the challenges that we face in terms of teaching, in terms of mentoring, we are not very self-critical, I would say, that we kind of take our power to a large extent to be very natural. And this is somewhat surprising, because as feminists, the first thing that we are taught is to question the binary between the personal and the public, or the private and the public, and to think about personal as political. But we rarely do talk about the power that we hold. And just being feminist does not absolve us of this kind of responsibility. So I think that's the second point. And further, I think even as students being part of our higher education system, we are never taught, or we are never encouraged to call out on any abuse of power. We just take it as it is, and we think that, okay, our PhD is important, we just have to do this 5 years, get out of it. And we don't say. And as mentors and as supervisors, we have a lot of power. Like we sign on fellowships, many things, we sign on stipends and things like that. And more important is we guide their knowledge process. We say that, okay, this is not the way to think, this is the way to think, this is the reading you have to do. So I think as students we are not taught in terms of looking at the whole power dynamics which is there. And even though we know that it is not natural, but we naturalize it. We're saying that this is how authority structures work. So we are very good in terms of analyzing power and authority outside of us rather than within us. So I think that could be one of the major reasons as to why the whole mentoring process has not really worked. And the last but one point that I think is important is that with many of the scholars, when I was writing this paper, I talked about like, have you thought about the mentoring process? But most of them have never thought about it, have never consciously, engaged with that. Most of them said that, no, this just happens. So there is no strategizing, there's no thinking. But when I think of my own experiences, and now when I'm a supervisor, when I think of the negotiations that I do with my students, I strategize and think. Then I think that even though we take it for natural, but it involves lot of thinking, lot of negotiation, lot of interaction. So therefore I think it is an important process, but of course we haven't yet very much looked at it. And again, going back to my paper, I would say that even though I did talk about power, but I got one of the comments from Professor Meena Gopal, and she said that one aspect on mentoring that I have not addressed, that is labor. That the whole labor that goes into the whole mentoring process from both the sides, both from the mentor side and from the mentee side, to make that relationship work. So I think that is also something very important that we need to keep in mind. And so I think at the end, why we are not engaging with mentoring, I think we are afraid to, at one point of time, to engage critically with ourselves. And we think that this inequality is part of a very naturalized system of learning, and therefore we do not question it. So yeah, so that would be my response to that question.
So a term that came up in your response was, of course, feminist, So our second question is that, do you think that there is a scope for a specifically feminist kind of mentoring in academia, especially sociology?
I have been thinking about this, whether it is possible to have a feminist mentoring in sociology. And I think this response is not only in terms of sociology, but it could be gender studies or anywhere. So if we are thinking about a feminist mentoring, whereas I believe that, especially with regard to research methodology, where there has been a lot of reflection in terms of, especially in ethnographic works, in terms of feminist ethnography, that we need to think about the power equations between the researcher and the research. But there has not been similar kind of engagement with the mentoring process as to, as feminists, what are the different ways in which we can evolve newer ways of mentoring that kinds of addresses the inequality which is there. And to a certain extent, as feminist sociologists, I believe that this is also to a certain extent our responsibility to engage with that, because what has happened is, I believe that there has been more focus on looking at research, looking at different experiences of people of different genders in terms of their experiences. But whereas if it comes to one of the important site of knowledge production, which is the relationship between a mentor and the mentee, in that I think feminists have really not looked at it as an essential component. And also tagging on to what I just responded to your last question, that to engage with and to think about feminist mentoring, it requires a very developed, nuanced sense of being able to use the autoethnographic kind of a research method, because it is an important aspect to look into your own self and be courageous enough to embrace the vulnerability which is there. And how can we break the silences and thereby make the research more accessible? And therefore, why an understanding of feminist mentoring? Because the whole process of feminist mentoring, the process itself, is an act of knowledge production, and therefore we need to look at it. But but we need to recognize that because feminist mentoring addresses power, both in terms of personal and in terms of professional, it involves two important aspects. One is which are interconnected with each other, and which I've also addressed it in my paper in terms of self-interrogation and self-disclosure. So that there is, and this I think is a major challenge where the whole mentoring process, feminist mentoring, it involves a lot of accountability from the mentees, but the onus is always with the mentor. So in that way, the accountability in terms of making the process feminist lies with the person who has the higher authority, who is in the higher position. So as a teacher, I would have to take upon myself more responsibility than the student in that context. And over a period of time, when the student doesn't remain a student, but becomes a young scholar and so on and so forth. So in that way, self-interrogation and self-disclosure then becomes a very, very important aspect. And then I think the other important aspect on feminist mentoring, which is therefore a major challenge, is that doing feminist mentoring also involves a shift in power relations. Like there is a recognition within feminist mentoring that when you're speaking, when you're showing a vulnerability, or when you're speaking the truth, there is a chance that this truth or this sharing of experiences could also become politicized at one particular point of time. So there is a risk that both the mentor and the mentee are taking in that relationship. And therefore, to what extent can we build the trust with each other? Can we build up ethical practices between the mentors and the mentee? That will decide whether we can have feminist mentoring. And you see, within academia, it is within this, the structures itself are so limited, and they are constituted by so much of inequality that at some point of time, to build these principles of, to build relationship, which is based on principles of ethics, which is based on principles of accountability, of trust, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of work. And how many of us are invested in that? That is also something that we need to keep in mind, because to do feminist mentoring, it involves a lot of commitment on both the sides. It's just not from the mentors, but also from the mentees. And are we ready to take up on it? So that is one important point, I thought. And the other important aspect is that feminist mentoring also realizes that this kind of process is not fixed. Like, it is not necessary that always a mentor would have more power than the other. It is more intersecting, like where at certain points of time, it would depend upon who has more power over a period of time. Like, for example, at one point of time, a very important mentor for me was Professor Maitri Krishnaraj, a pioneer in women's studies. But now when I think of the work that she has done, and recently when I was talking to her in terms of, how the whole context of time and space that has shifted with me at a one particular point of time being in a more powerful position than her at a different point of time. So in that context, how do we, in terms of feminist mentoring, think about feminist solidarity, think about, intellectual support? All these things then become important. So it is not fixed, because in terms of time and space, the power shifts, the authority shifts, the position shifts, and age is a very important, factor. So at this time, I have my age with me, but not Professor Maitri. So Krishnaraj. So how does that work out is also something it involves. So I think, and therefore I think it is a challenge. It is difficult, but it is not impossible. But as with any other feminist politics, it needs commitment from both the sides. So yes, to answer to your question, there is a scope, but it depends a lot of on the scholar or on the feminist herself. How does, for me, how do I think, what are the changes that I want to bring about in my own relationship with my students? And it is also very contextual. So as I keep on telling to my students, there can't be any model that I take that this and that I have this model and I'll apply it for all students. It's not. It is very contextual. It depends upon the gender differences. It depends upon our cultural differences, and how do we negotiate that, rather than how do we negotiate that? So and whether it will be complete, I don't think so, because at the end, how much ever as a teacher I say that I want to engage with my authority, but till the time I'm giving marks, I do have some amount of authority. I can't erase it. But I think once going beyond those institutionalized structures, there is a lot of scope. It need not be, I need not be bound to my mentor in terms of a hierarchical relationship. I can go beyond it, because I don't have at that point of time an institutional authority to adhere to. I can transcend that. So yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's all. So there's scope, but it needs a lot of effort, commitment, and desire to engage with feminist mentoring.
So, you've also looked at the significance of classrooms as sites of knowledge production and critical thinking, as well as self-reflexive exercises. So how do you look at, this relationship? Could you elaborate a little bit on this?
Yeah, thank you. You see, what has been happening is over a period of time, I have been interested in looking at these processes. So for me, I enjoy being a teacher more than being a researcher. So for me, my classrooms were always very, very important. And so in context of that, I've been thinking, I started with mentoring, but over a period of time, I've gone into classrooms. And I think from whatever I was reading on classroom, the major narrative that emerges, which I've also addressed in my paper, is the fact about how the merit has declined, how the standards of learning has declined. This is where scholars have also argued about how this kind of discussion is in the context where there are new generation of students and scholars who are entering our university spaces, entering classrooms, who come from a historically marginalized groups. And in that context, we have this, sociology in crisis, classrooms are going down, there is not much learning happening, and so on and so forth. In that context, based on few work that one has done, and also based on the fact that even before coming to University of Hyderabad, I was teaching in Savitribai Phule Pune University. And then before that, I was teaching in multiple colleges. I was teaching in Symbiosis, I was teaching in Abeda Anandar, in Pune, Ferguson College, St. Mira's College. So what I realized over a period of time is that the classroom is very, very heterogeneous. So to conceive of classroom as a homogeneous, kind of a category itself is a very, very problematic kind of an idea. And especially someone who has defined oneself as a feminist sociology is thinking about using feminist pedagogy and all, to where the experiences of the students are very important. So in that context, there is a clear recognition that there is a heterogeneity in terms of experiences. So in that context, it is very important to go back to classroom, because if then classrooms are important spaces for many of us. The second important aspect I feel is that in our doing sociology or gender studies in our everyday, in most of the time, whenever we are looking at quality or engagement with the discipline itself, we mostly focus on curriculum, we focus on research, we focus on publication, we focus on conferences, and in recent times on blogs and things like that. But the everyday act of doing sociology or everyday act of doing gender studies, which is lectures, which is classroom, I think has huge significance. And we as teachers, I feel we do not give maybe as teachers we give it a lot of importance, but as researchers who are interested in the whole teaching learning process in terms of knowledge construction, we do not look into the site of classroom as an important site. I think we are missing it. So what would a focus on classroom bring in? I think a focus on the classroom would bring in about how contested the whole arena of knowledge production is, and how heterogeneous and how in different structures, in different hierarchical and unequal structures, are the students themselves placed in the whole learning process. So therefore, what we are teaching, what is our curriculum, what is our policies is not same, or their experiences are very different in the way they engage with that. And if we want to do serious feminist work, feminist politics in terms of engagement with ideas, it is important we understand that heterogeneity. So in that way, I think classrooms are very, very important. And the other important aspect is going back to feminist pedagogy, because like if you look at the works of Professor Maitri Chaudhary, or if you look at the works of Bell Hooks, Sharmila Rege, all those who have really worked on feminist pedagogy always focus on experience. And where is that experience shared? Students, only when they become researchers or PhD students write about, to a certain extent, maybe write about their experience, but mostly write about the research that they're doing. It is only in the classroom that the students share their experiences. And so therefore, if sharing of experiences is one important site of knowledge production, why? Because as these scholars have also argued that our experiences are located within our specific social locations, which then also intersect with the larger macro structures of politics, economics, the whole economy of it, the history of it, our own location. So if this is so, the experiences is also kind of generated in relation to the engagement that they would have with the teacher, or to the way the question is framed, or to the way their peers are responding to that. So in that way, the discussions that emerge in the classroom, the opinions that emerge, play a very important role in shaping of the discipline. So therefore, I very sincerely believe that that classrooms are an important site, and we need to take our classrooms not only as site of teaching, but also learning about the discipline, about the students who are part of our discipline. Like for example, I teach a course called academic writing for PhD students in University of Hyderabad, and we have a section on building an argument. How do you build an argument in a paper? And then it does talk about building confidence. I have seen that in the first class, when I just was sharing about, okay, these are the steps, it could not relate well with the students. But when I started sharing my the paper that I had submitted, and then the reviewers comment, and then what I did. So if I share it in that way, and show even moments where I lose confidence in my writing, I am also vulnerable, because a published thing shows that everything is fine in the writing process. But to be frank, it is not. It has a lot of ups and downs. The reviewer comments are sometimes so challenging. And how do we deal with that? And while dealing with that, come up with something so polished that even for me, when I look at that published thing, I feel like, wow, this is something. So if I share the whole process about my experience, I think it would give more confidence to both me as a teacher and to the student, in terms of that, yes, our experience sharing is important. And in that context, they would also hopefully, I can just hopefully share their experience in order to make the learning more collaborative. So, so in that way, I think classrooms are extremely important. So, I mean, and the challenge that I'm facing now is more because of that online teaching. I'm missing so much my classroom. And of course, this is the online space has given a new form to the classroom, but still, and this has really brought back the question to me that no, classrooms are very, very important. So yes, so for me, classrooms are important. And not only in terms of the experiences, but in terms of, engagement with curriculum. Like, for example, I teach sociology of gender. When I frame the syllabus, I share it with my students. They give comments. It again gets reworked. So we share the reading. So what it does is that the students also feel like a stake in whatever is being learned. It is just not a passive learning process. So I think respect, dignity, ethics, accountability emerges from the classroom. And I think, therefore, as feminist sociologist, yes, I think classrooms are very important. So, yeah.
Right. So since we are talking about classrooms and the importance of feminist pedagogy, one of the questions which came up while going through your writings was that you write that how a classroom can transform into a feminist classroom. So could you maybe throw some light on this? How do you suggest that a classroom can become a feminist classroom when we're talking about pedagogy, etc.?
Yeah, for those who would read my paper, you find that I've referred to Hooks, I've referred to, Sharmila Rege's work, I've referred to, looking at how, again, going back to what I was just responding to your last question in terms of classroom, the experiences. So now if I situate it in terms of feminist pedagogy, then what, among many, just drawing from all these scholars, if I just say there are 2 or 3 points which are extremely important within such a pedagogical, framework. One is the fact that it is responsive to experiences. So that is the bottom line. The second is somewhere a critical component within that pedagogy is how do you inculcate critical thinking among students, right? So that is another core important part. And also a creation of a space where the students believe that they have a voice, they can build their perspective and be self-reflective in that process. The other important point, which is, a part of this pedagogical framework, is perceiving of learning as collaborative, and also a very important notion that knowledge is not absolute, but it is, historically contextual, it is dynamic, and so on and so forth. So it is rather student-centric rather than teacher-based. So if these are, or again, adding to it, Sharmila Rege added the Phule Ambedkarite feminist pedagogy that talks about where it is just not about teaching and learning, but also about dissent, like how through learning we can dissent, right? So there are these various aspects that goes into making the feminist pedagogy. Now for this, then classrooms then become very, very important. And why is this so? Because especially in the context of institutionalization of women's studies, one space where we can really, share our ideas, share our feminist politics, share the ways of doing feminist praxis, the ways of doing feminist research is the classroom. So somewhere to a certain extent, it could act as sites of critical consciousness raising sites, where the classrooms are. So because what it does, it instills these feminist politics within students. And also because you see in recent times, we have approached our gender studies in terms of questioning the reduction of the idea of gender to women. So, and looking at it more in terms of gender diversity, and also, starting from this idea that feminism is for everybody. So not only we do talk about gender politics, but in that context, masculinity, and so on and so forth, the whole breaking of the binary, questioning of, the naturalness of binary constructions of man, woman. We talk about all these things. So what happens is that, therefore, because it is one of the space in which many students get introduced to these ideas for the first time, and many times get reiterated of these ideas, it provides a very, very important site for consciousness raising, for feminist politics. So in that context, I feel that yes, classrooms are very, very important for feminist pedagogy, and of course, to transform a classroom into a feminist classroom, it involves efforts by both the teacher and the student. And why I'm saying that is because we need to understand that all students do not share the same agenda of learning a particular discipline. You see, many students have different interests as to why they are part of the classroom, or why they are even taking up a degree. So it is not necessary that, for example, if I teach a course on sociology of gender and I have 40 students who are signing up, it is not as if that all the 40 are interested in doing gender studies. Sometimes they just take it because they feel that the other optionals they don't want to take. So there are various reasons as even why they do sociology or why they do gender studies and so on and so forth. But to make it into a classroom, it involves therefore a lot of effort to know. So know the student, where are they coming from, and how do you make the classrooms a safe, inclusive space. Why this is important, because if the pedagogical framework is based on experiences, if students are sharing their experience, or even the teachers are sharing their experience, the space has to be very, very safe and inclusive. It should be non-judgmental. The notion of respect, the notion of stigma, ethics, all these needs to be a part of it. So therefore, I believe that it can't come in the first class. There has to be a lot of effort taken up to develop that kind of a classroom. And I can see that for the last 2 semesters, the challenge that I'm facing for online, and I'm finding it very difficult to create such a classroom because I'm not able to interact the way I want to interact, to create that safe, inclusive space. Because for feminist pedagogy, that is a very, very important core aspect, and that needs to be nurtured. And within online, it is a major challenge because the space itself, the online space itself, is sometimes very inclusive space, so in that context it becomes a challenge. And then the question of trust. So to build up a feminist classroom, I think what we need is a question of trust between us, between the members of the classroom. Because sometimes what happens is, when there is experience sharing, sometimes it is very personal, sometimes it is very painful. People share, students share very painful journeys, very emotional journeys that they have. And in that context, if all of us are not tuned to that, tuned to listen, or trained to listen with respect, then it becomes very difficult to handle that vulnerability. So I think as a teacher, that is a major responsibility that we have, especially if you want to, convert a classroom into a feminist classroom. So it is, again, going back to mentoring, going back to classroom, it is work. It needs effort. And of course, it needs a lot of commitment. So it is not easy. It is so difficult to say no to a student. If they want to come talk to you and all, it is so difficult. But so you need to be very patient. And as Bell Hooks says, you also need to develop your sense of humor quite a lot to develop that classroom. Yeah, a lot. Yeah. Yes.
So, if you could also talk about some of the challenges of teaching gender studies, sociology of gender, or critical feminist pedagogy in a diverse classroom, particularly since you have taught in, Maharashtra before and then Hyderabad now. So, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. You see, the first thing is, I think going back to what I was just saying is that not every student have the perspectives, shared perspective of learning the discipline. For example, in the earlier university that I was teaching, many of the students who used to take admission, they had dreams of getting up, good job, government job, so UPSC, state services, civil services, banking, all these were very, very important to them. So getting admission to sociology meant that they would have access to the institutions, to the library, and so on and so forth. So sociology or gender studies was the last thing on their mind while doing sociology. So so that also we need to keep in mind that it is not necessary that, as I just said in response to your earlier question, that just because 40 or 50 students sign up for the course, it means that all of them are interested. It is not. So there is a requirement for 4 courses. They just take 4 courses. So that is, I think, somewhere we need to recognize. The other important challenge that comes is, of course, if you're talking about feminist pedagogy and we're talking about experiences, it is a challenge to create a safe, inclusive, non-judgmental spaces. And I'm still struggling with it, because how do you create classrooms which are safe, which are inclusive, which are non-judgmental, where if you share your experiences, students won't react in a dismissive manner about experiences, because for some experiences may seem very trivial, but for others it could be very, very important. It is emotional. So how do I, as a teacher, if I'm really encouraging experiences, how do I ensure that these spaces are strong enough or secure enough to carry those experiences within them? Because sharing of experiences either by the teacher or by the student is a process that make yourself vulnerable or make the student vulnerable. So there needs to be support structures there established. So that is a major challenge that I have felt. The other aspect is also a recognition that margins are also very complex and also very layered. Like for some, it could be an identity that is based on gender, but for others, it could be an identity that is based on sexuality. For others, it could be religion or region or language, because I think that was one thing that emerged in my earlier university was language, where questioning the whole power of English as an hegemonic language and debating for a very powerful position where one can articulate or create knowledges through different regional languages. So in that context, it was very important. And why is this important? Because if it is based on experiences and then relating it to theory, students would be comfortable in articulating in their own language. So how do I, as a teacher, ensure that? So that was a major challenge also, because I am a non-Marathi speaker. So I learned the language, because I stayed there for a long time, almost 20 years, which is a huge chunk of my lifetime. I've stayed in Maharashtra. I learned the language and it helped. So that was an important aspect about creating this spaces, or challenges that come in teaching gender studies within a sociology classroom. The other thing that I think was very, very important, and this is not only in terms of teaching gender studies, but also teaching sociology, is a question of confidence. I think because for many of the students in Pune University, it's a state university, many of them come from rural areas, they are first generation learners. Sometimes they find it very difficult to speak, especially in the first semester. So one has to work. So I can't give an assignment like a presentation just like that. So I have to contextualize a presentation with a written document, because some students feel it so difficult. So how do you inculcate confidence? How do you ensure that the others respect while the students is sharing? So these are the team building exercises that you have to invest a lot of time and effort within that small semester that you have, within that 4 hours a week or 6 hours a week that you had. So that was a important challenge. I think I just have 2 or 3. So the other important challenge that I've always faced is how do you train ourselves? How do I train myself and others? The very act of listening. So here I'm just talking about not listening to the voices, but also to the silences which are there within the classrooms. You see, within the classrooms, I felt as a teacher, when you say that, okay, respond any question, observation, opinions, there would be few students who are very articulate. They'll raise their hand, they will share, they're very confident, they will talk to you, they'll stay back after the class, talk. But there are some students who are very silent, who won't say a thing. So they'll just be there. They won't even make their presence feel, felt in the classroom. So how do I ensure that their opinions also get involved? They articulate it. So then you devise a number of ways that you can email me, you can message me, you can send me a text, you can give me a note beforehand, so that if you don't want to be addressed in the class. So how do you like? Some students like to be addressed by name. Certain students feel that if you address by name, it means you're being targeted. So there are multiple ways, and therefore each classroom is different. So many times my feminist pedagogy works only in the second semester. The first semester just goes in trying to know about them. So I think that is the major challenge. And the last one that I feel is that sometimes as a teacher, one does not have the right vocabulary. We are not trained to deal with the experiences that are emerging. Like for example, I think in recent times, I've been reading a lot on, gender diversity, sexuality, for me to understand certain aspects, but I'm still not very confident about, there's so many terms and terminologies, identities that are being recognized. So as a teacher, I feel very, limited in my vocabulary, limited in my understanding. So it could happen with many, because there are teachers in, different universities, different regional spaces, different colleges. So we are not trained, I feel, to deal with the complexity of experiences that are emerging in the classrooms. And I think that is an area where we need to do a lot of work, because that is a major challenge, I feel. If I have to call out from not only from the classrooms in Pune University or in Hyderabad. So these are some of the challenges. And but for both, I think one thing is emerging very, very clearly is that classrooms are not given. Every classroom is so different. So therefore, it is very difficult to develop models. And sometimes these strategies work, like, for example, experience sharing, which is core of feminist pedagogy. But I've seen some classrooms, they just refuse to share. And it is not something that you can just give as assignment, say that, 5 marks for your experience sharing. It doesn't work like that. Okay, so in that way, I think it is a very important point that one needs to keep in mind about, teaching, not only sociology or gender studies, anywhere that, especially those of us who are interested in, or committed to this kind of politics of learning, is to recognize that classrooms are not given, and to build such classrooms requires a lot of effort, lot of nurturance, and as I said, patience, work. And it is also not only rests with the teacher. I think there has to be like a mutual cooperation or collaboration which is there. Yeah, so I think in that way that there is a huge possibility. But given the larger institutional structures, the way we are placed, I don't know how much we can, but I think I can say it for university, yes, because as teachers, I think we have more autonomy than what many teachers can find it in colleges. So I think as teachers in the university spaces, we have to take, advantage of the autonomy that we have, in terms of teaching, curriculum, assignments. I think assignments is a very interesting space to create these, very inclusive classrooms. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chari Wagh, for the engaging conversation. We have actually taken away a lot on teaching and pedagogy, and I personally found the discussion very, very enthralling. I hope that we can take away a lot of it as young scholars and budding teachers as well. So thank you once again from our team here at Doing Sociology for taking time out to do this conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for allowing me to speak, because I was sharing my ideas, and as I was also thinking about this interview, rereading my article, I found that there is much more that one can do, one can think about. And of course, thanks a ton to Professor Maitri Chaudhary and for you, Dipali and Rituparna, for hearing me out, listening to me, and giving me the space. Thank you so much. Thank you.